Hi, Jin.
Hi, Shuke.
Welcome to our podcast, Voice. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to talk to you today.
We met in Bali, Ubud Writers and Readers Festival, where you joined as an author of a book, your latest book, right?
That is correct.
The
If you want me to show you your audience, you're not posting the video, but
yeah, yeah, of course.
yeah.
The Dao of Flow.
hmm
So the subtitle is A Journey to Discover the Ancient Wisdom of Water.
hmm
So this podcast is around ancestor.
hmm
So this book itself is written in inspiration from from our ancestors, right?
hmm
Yeah.
That is true.
Let's start with exploring the spirit of your book.
hmm Yeah, I've always been intrigued and inspired by ancient wisdom that has been passed down for generations by our ancestors, and they're not necessarily coming from our own racial ancestors per se, but it's also spiritual ancestors that um, we that we respect and that we learn from other cultures, from other countries. And in my book, of course, I derive a lot of my own perception of the world through a Taoist worldview, and even from the very beginning, I started from a mythology from ancient China. This is a story from the Great Yu, yeah, or sometimes called Yu the Great, and he is a mythological or legendary king from ancient China, maybe 3,000 years ago. And he was known for taming the flood in China. So there was the Great Flood along the Yellow River and potentially also along the Yangtze River. And Yu the Great was known for, first he had a father who was employed by the emperor to try and solve the Great Flood. And the father was trying to stop the flood by building walls along the rivers and damming up this area, damming up that area, and trying to block the flow of water and to try and contain it, to control it. And eventually, when the water was too great, the walls collapsed and they came
Oh,
crashing into the villages and killing more people. And as a result, the father was punished and banished to the mountains. And then, strange enough, his son was being chosen to take over his father's role to try and solve the Great Flood. And so, Yu the Great, because he grew up seeing how his father's method and how it didn't work. And he decided to change his strategy. He went around the whole country, he learned from the locals, he tried to understand the nature of water, and he learned that the best way to control water is actually to let it flow. And he did it by dredging canals from the Yellow River into the fields, the farms to irrigate the soil, to harvest the land. And also, if the water is too strong, just, you know, um, direct the water toward the ocean eventually. And by keeping the flow, the current of the water in tandem with the flow of nature, with the harmonious rhythm of nature, then he was able to solve the Great Flood. And as a result, the civilization in China grew. And actually, this story made its way into Japan as well. In many parts of Japan, there's the story of Dai kana.
uh-huh.
It's worship in certain areas, in certain temples. And actually, a professor in Japan has done a lot of research on how the mythology was also found in, different locations in Japan and different shrines. She's a professor at Hosei University, I think.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So the method was imported to Japan.
I'm not sure if the method itself,
Mm-hmm.
the mythology was
Hmm.
was brought to Japan,
Hmm.
and
I
people
see.
liked the story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And across generations, there were actually many Japanese engineers in history that learned from
Hmm.
or was
Inspired
inspired
by.
by this
Hmm.
story, and then they also built irrigation canals from the rivers in Japan.
Hmm.
And I ended my book actually with a story of Nakamura Tetsu
Yes, yes, yes.
Ishii, and I describe him as Yu the Great of our modern times. He
Hmm.
and what was even more impressive and well worth emulating about his life story is that he was not only serving his own people in his
Hmm.
own culture, he went all the way to Afghanistan and he was there initially to save the lives of people, but then he realized that the biggest problems that people have in Afghanistan was water crisis. If they have cleaner water, a lot of the illnesses that he had to treat could be cured naturally. And so he went around finding water in Afghanistan, digging wells, and
Hmm.
eventually he decided that the best way is actually to divert water from the Kunar River to the surrounding area to irrigate the land and make it green, to greenify
Hmm.
Afghanistan.
So, although he's a doctor, he's
Hmm.
a man of pure water. Hmm.
Yes, he's an embodiment of water and of Rita Great's wisdom.
Yes, 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 yes. So yeah, so I recommend the audience to read your book
Thank you.
yeah, so
And
which shares your story with the ancient ancestors, right?
yeah, and it's not. I mean, it's not only about ancient ancestors. I think there were a lot of contemporary mentors that influenced and inspired me
Yeah, yeah,
personally.
yeah, yeah.
And among them, one of my closest mentors in life is actually a professor at Waseda University,
Mm,
and his name is David Hawley. He was a former foreign correspondent for the LA Times in first in the U.S. and then in China, in Warsaw, in Korea for a little bit, in Kosovo, in Japan, and when he retired, he became an adjunct professor at Keio University in Waseda,
mm,
where I met him. And people like him, he taught me a lot about the world through stories that he's gone through himself.
mm,
And I wrote my book, in the start of the pandemic, or back in 2021, and he was there to mentor me through the process, and I wrote a subchapter about him in the book, and he just passed away this year.
oh,
And so to me, he's kind of like a spiritual ancestor.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I learned a lot about the world, how to read the news, how to analyze world events, and he has a philosophy that's very much inspired by Buddhism, by
Mm,
Daoism, and by Hindu philosophy. A very non-dualistic way of looking at
right,
the world.
right.
So people like him, people like there's also a conservationist in China who she was shadowing pandas in the mountains for 8 years, just like Jane Goodall in Africa. But she was doing this with pandas and snow leopards in the Tibetan plateau, and eventually she started a foundation to protect animals, not only in China but also in other parts of the world, in collaboration with WWF. And then there's an artist who embodied the spirit of Daoism in his work, I think, and also stories of other mentors that I met personally, and I learned from them, like Professor Scott Rizal, when he was doing his rural education action program in China to help improve the the cognitive function of babies in rural China because they were lagging behind compared with city kids.
Sure.
And he was running different experiments in different villages to see how he could improve their cognitive function. And I was part of the team to measure the IQs of the babies and to go back to measure their scores, for the second time. And I learned a lot through these different people. And I tried to connect all these different stories and events through a Daoist philosophy that is influenced by my own Tai Chi practice. And Tai Chi, of course, in Japanese is Taijiquan.
Yes.
It's and I'm also very much inspired by Aikido. I learned and was part of an Aikido dojo in Yokohama when I was studying at Waseda. So Japanese wisdom, I do think Japanese wisdom is a core influence in my life, and I do take people like Musashi Miyamoto. Oh yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
Miyamoto Musashi as a spiritual ancestor that I learned a lot from, and I love the historical fiction written by Eiji Yoshikawa about Musashi.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it is really great to hear your story in full of, inspirations from many culture, right? So,
Yeah.
could you share a little bit about your own personal history and your family, ancestor, and things?
Yeah, sure. So when I was at Waseda, I had a call with my grand uncle. I've never met my grandfather. He passed away before I was born, but my grand uncle was his only brother, and he was telling me some of the history of our family on my father's side. And I won't delve into my mother's side because my grandfather on my mom's side was adopted, so we can't really trace his history, but probably from somewhere from Fujian in southern China. But on my dad's side, my great grandfather was from a place called Teochew or Chaozhou in Mandarin, but it's in southern China in the Guangdong province. And but the Teochew people are different from the Cantonese. We speak a different dialect, and it's a huge diaspora in Southeast Asia. But he left China during the late Qing dynasty when China was in a state of chaos and war. And he first went to Hong Kong. He had three brothers. One stayed back in Chaozhou. One went to Hong Kong with him, and then he stayed back in Hong Kong. And then he continued his way to Laos.
Oh.
And there he met my great grandmother. I believe my great grandmother could also be a Teochew lady, but was maybe have roots in Laos and was living in Laos at that time. But he married my great grandmother, who's from Laos, and then they went down to Thailand, and then eventually down to Malaysia, where they settled down in Penang. And Penang is a small island in Malaysia towards the north, below Thailand. And I grew up in Penang. My father was born there. He met my mother,
Oh.
and it's an island populated by maybe I would say like 70% Chinese, overseas Chinese communities. And I'd say I was very lucky when I reflect just recently on my own childhood education, because I went to Chinese schools when I was young, and Chinese schools meant that these schools were founded by overseas Chinese in the 20th century, or some even in the 19th century. And they were organized by Chinese communities, but they have the same curriculum as the Malaysian education system. So we have to learn Malay language as our national language. We have to learn English in school. All our science subjects were taught in English, science and math. All our arts and humanities, like history, geography, were all taught in Malay language.
Oh.
And then on top of that, Chinese language was a mandatory because we went to Chinese schools. And so I grew up learning three languages, and
Oh.
we speak a Minnan dialect at home, which is the same as what the Taiwanese speak.
Hmm.
If they're local Taiwanese from the Fujian area, they would speak the same dialect as we do. So we kind of
Sure.
speak four languages,
Oh.
and I I can go forever about my life story, but let me try and keep it brief. So I went to K11, from kindergarten until
Mm-hmm.
grade 11 in Chinese schools. And when I was in middle school, I think one event that stood out was starting to take up martial arts in Shorinken or Shorin Kempo.
Oh, Shorin.
Yeah, Shaolin martial arts.
Mm.
And it was I also went for meditation retreats. I did my first noviceship, like becoming
Mm-hmm.
a monk in a temple when I was 12 for 10 days.
Mm.
But I started studying meditation more seriously from the age of 13 onwards, on par with my martial arts journey. My mom sometimes after school would send me to. I wanted to do this myself. For some reason I don't know why, but I wanted to go to
Oh,
learn.
so you yourself wanted to do that? Huh.
Yeah, yeah. There was a teacher who learned
Mm.
from Pao Sayadaw in
Oh.
from
Oh.
Myanmar,
Oh.
and
Oh.
she's a nun. She brought it to Penang, and after school, I would drop by the temple and learn from her how to meditate.
Mm.
And after that, my mom would come and pick
Pao
me up.
Seado. Mm.
Pao Sayadaw.
Mm.
And then after that, I also learned from Ajahn Brahm. He comes to Penang every year. And then after I finished my grade 11, or we call Form 5 in Malaysia, I went to Kuala Lumpur for 1 year, where I studied in a Canadian international school that was part of Sunway
Mm-hmm.
College for my grade 12. And then during that time, I joined, toward, I believe it was in September of that year of my grade 12, I joined a humanitarian volunteering program in Fukushima.
Mm.
And this is organized by the Buddhist communities, especially by the Soto Zen monks
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
IBOE. That's how I met Matsuoka-san.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And I know he's also on your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in in the adolescence crisis at that point of time. I didn't know where I wanted to go and study.
Mm.
I knew I wanted to go abroad,
Mm-hmm.
but my father's business was facing some financial difficulties,
Mm.
and I needed to find scholarships to study elsewhere because I went to this Canadian international school. I could no longer go to a local university in Malaysia.
Mm.
And then Matsuoka-san told me, my initial dream was to go to Canada or North
Mm-hmm.
America to do my undergrad. But then
Mm.
I fell in love with Japan when I was in Fukushima because I was very touched by the spirit of Kizuna in
Oh.
Japan. And I talked about this in my book, The Dao of Flow. But so many Japanese flew from all around the country to Fukushima, and they were there just to show their support for solidarity with the local people. They were volunteering in the evacuation centers. They were helping to clean up the space. They were interacting with us. And even though I couldn't speak Japanese at that time, we communicated through kanji characters
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
on paper,
Yeah.
and we could understand one another with body language and simple English and simple Chinese characters.
Mm-hmm.
And I fell in love with the country. And Matsuoka-san was a graduate from Waseda, and he said, "Why don't you come to Japan and study? We'll take good care of you." And I was very touched by his words. I went back and I applied to 3 different schools, to Hong Kong University, to Waseda, and then to another university in Taiwan. But at the end of the day, after evaluating all the strengths and weaknesses and my own, I actually asked myself, if putting aside financial concerns and all these different worries, like what would my heart really want to, or where would my heart really want to go?
Mm.
And all the memories of Japan came flooding back into me, and
Oh.
I decided that, I want to go to Japan. I wanted to learn a lot from this nation, even though there's a lot of atrocities, especially also in my family in relation to Japan during the Second World War.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think there's a lot that we can learn from Japan in today's context. The country has changed a lot since the Second World War, and it's a very pacifist country. All the old people I met are very peaceful, and they don't like war. Their generations, they suffered from, they lost their parents in the war, or the bombings in Kobe or in Tokyo bombings. So they know the sufferings of the war. And then, Japan has went through a lot in the past 40 years. It went through one of the fastest growing economy to now it's a bit of a stagnant situation. But there's still a lot of ancient wisdom that we can learn from there, like Aikido, like Sado, the tea ceremony, the flower arrangements, the bonsai, the gardens, the mountains that they're preserving, and different things. I was sort of fascinated by Japan, and so I chose to go to Waseda, and it was the best decision in my life. And then as a result of going to Japan, I ended up going back to China because Waseda and Peking University, Peking Daigaku, they have a double degree program.
Yeah.
I went there in my junior year. I graduated with 2 degrees in 2018. And I'll finish this off really quickly with one last thing. Before going to Japan, I went to a place called Ladakh in northern India.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with Ladakh as well. The Himalayas is something that calls to my heart. And during my 3rd year, one of my Ladakhi friends, he got married and he moved to Japan with this girl. We met up before he got married. And then he moved to Japan when I was in my senior year, and we started meeting up. We talked about, the memories that we had. We reminisce about the memories we had in the Himalayas. We talked about Buddhism. We talked about our collective potential, and we decided to start a project together by bringing people to Ladakh to learn from the ancient indigenous wisdom there, to learn from the local Tibetan tradition, and also to do some volunteering and meditation and trekking. And we started in 2018, and we later on co-founded a nonprofit there in 2019 called Spawo Foundation. And since then, I've tried to go back to Ladakh every summer, and except during the pandemic when I was stuck at home, and I applied for a master's degree program. I went to China to do my master's, and then stayed back in China for a year, and came to the US just last year to start my PhD program here. But last year was the first time we went back to Ladakh, and then this year again to resume our projects. And it's been a very fulfilling journey, looking back. And the Ladakhis I consider them also my spiritual ancestors, because I learned so much from the grandparents of Gurmet, my co-founder, and also his family. They are the warmest people that I've ever met in my life. So, and I think I have families in different parts of the world, in Japan, in Ladakh, in Malaysia, in Singapore, and now in the US as well. So I'm so grateful for everything.
Yeah. So you yourself is like water flowing, flowing around.
I like to think so, but in my book, I also wrote that you can only judge a person after he or she or they have passed away, because the real challenge is to embody the wisdom of water until the end of your life.
Right.
It is a constant process, and
Yeah.
I might be doing it pretty well so far, but then the challenge is to maintain that equanimity, that wisdom and compassion, and to continue with it moving forward.
Yeah. That's great. So, so I was touched by what you said. In the previous generation, of course, in not only in Asia, but so in our case, in Asia, sadly, we experienced big war, right?
Mm-hmm.
And which affected so many ignorant people.
Mm-hmm.
So in that generation, the very people who suffered uh, are not easy to reconcile each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the role of next generation is uh, learning from what the previous generation experienced
Mm-hmm.
and knowing each other better to uh, reconcile the more in the next generation.
Mm. Yeah. I think it's very sad what happened in the past. If we're talking about the Second World War, and I mean, there's a lot of tragedies that happened across human history, and the tragedies sometimes are still ongoing. With the war in Ukraine and
Right.
Russia, in Palestine and Israel. And I was recommended this book by a very close friend from Indonesia. Actually, I met her during the Ubud Writers and Readers Festival. It's called The Stones Cry Out by Okuizumi Hikaru.
Hmm.
He won the Akutagawa Prize. I haven't finished the book, so I can't really talk much about it. But it's about a soldier who came back from the Second World War, and he still has to suffer from some of the memories that came and haunt him from time to time. But he found stone collecting as a very meditative
Yeah.
hobby, and he goes around rivers and the mountains to collect stones. And even from his perspective, when I read about how the Japanese soldiers were being sort of brainwashed into thinking that dying for the country, for the people, and doing it in a cruel way sometimes is beneficial for the greater good, and they brought that into their grave. Some of them, it's and I think a lot of us are not. We do not have the agency of choosing who we are because of the environment that shaped us. We have less of an agency than what
Right.
we think we actually do. And the real change really begin when we're mindful of what happened within us, when we're conscious about what's programming us, what's going on in our mind. And that's when I think we start to have a little bit of agency, when we can influence our thoughts. Otherwise, we're just like ChatGPT. We're just a bunch of information that's been inputted into us, and randomly, just as a combination of hormones, of things going on inside the body, and then we do certain things, we take certain actions. And I try to give these people in the past who's done terrible things sort of a reason that they were acting the way they were because they weren't aware of how they were being programmed, right?
Right.
And
Right. So
but
they didn't have autonomy.
autonomy, yeah. And that's why I think the study of the mind, which Buddhists advocate, is very important. And so I think people of our generation, we're very lucky because we live in a relatively stable and peaceful moment in history. I mean, for a lot of Japanese, for Malaysians, for the most part of the world has gotten better over the past 50 years. And in peaceful times, it's time when we can engage in the study of art and humanities, the study of the mind. We have tools that help us make things more efficient. We have so much more time that, I mean, a lot of people waste their time on social media, another way of subconsciously being programmed by the media.
All right.
But if we could use that time to just, for example, read a book, and while reading this book, I have so much conversations with myself and with the author. And I think I learned something new about myself when I'm reading a new book. And I think, having that awareness of ourselves that we have the potential to change for the better, then we can actually tap into this potential to break what I call the in-group and out-group divide.
In-group, out-group divide.
Yes, the in-group, out-group divide. So there's a human tendency to
So you mean the feeling of seeing someone in group, someone out group.
out-group. Yeah, I think it's a tribal evolution,
Right, right. Yeah.
of the mind that came out from, back when we were in the Saharas, when we were different tribes and we had to protect our tribes in order for the tribe to survive so that we ourselves can survive. And it's human tendency to sort of subconsciously group people as part of the family group, part of the community, and people who are the out group, and they tend to dehumanize the out group.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah.
In history.
Yeah. So when we go into war, so
Yeah.
the first things the ruler try to do is dehumanizing the enemy side.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's done not just on the Japanese side, it's done also on the US side, when they were having a war with the Japan. It's done in all different cultures when they go on to war. And I think, as I said, tap into this potential to expand our boundaries of the in-group to include all human beings, and not just human beings, but all animals and plants as our in-group, all of Earth, Mother Earth. And if we can do that, then we start to show real concern, love, and compassion for other people in different cultures, and for animals that are suffering. That millions of animals are being killed in a very merciless way in our society,
Yeah.
and a lot of those meat actually go to waste. And I think if people are brought to see how animals are being killed in factories and farms, then they can really choose to reduce meat, maybe, and maybe some people might want to go as far as to be vegetarian. But to go back to the human to human relations, for my own self, because I chose to go to Japan, I feel like I'm part of Japanese culture. I feel as an in-group in Japan as well, because I speak the language.
Yeah.
And I see my Japanese friends, my Japanese brothers and sisters as part of my own family. Whether it's you, Matsuoka-san, I feel like you all are part of my family, and I've learned so much from you and him. And I'm so grateful for being able to do that, because not everyone is able to step out of their own culture and nation boundaries.
Right.
I sometimes travel around in the U.S. and I see so much hatred going on, especially to what they seem as the outsiders, because the Democrats see the Republicans as the outgroup,
Yeah. Right.
right? And then the Republicans see the Democrats as the outgroup. And just because they disagree on certain policies and values, they they do not have to sort of push that group away. But actually, we need to have conversations going on between these groups, because if you put them together to spend some time, going for an outing, maybe go for a hiking together and share some stories about one another's life.
Sure.
And I'm sure you'll find more commonalities with each other than all these different abstract ideas that you have about the society. When you realize that these are the person that you think you dislike on the abstract level, you find that he or she actually, have love for their own family. They want to be happy. They want to live a better life. And we all have the same desires and the same sufferings. And so all humans share very similar sufferings. We all go through, as what the Buddhists say, birth, sickness, aging, and death. And there's death in the family. We have to go through parting in life. And I think we have a lot of commonalities that are rooted in nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so it sounds like the almost the answer to my last question.
Okay.
If we want to become a good ancestor,
Hmm.
yeah, one thing we can do is leaving something for the future generation.
Right.
But one more thing, what can we stop doing something
Mm.
for not leaving it for the future generation? So, with your message, yeah, you talked about in-group, out-group issues,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, which is part of the the human nature
Hmm.
embedded in
Yeah.
our mindset, but
Hmm.
we need to overcome it, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think one thing that I personally wish to see sort of being stopped, or a measure that I wish the world can take while I'm still alive, is actually to ban plastic.
Hmm.
I think if plastic is being banned one day, and that everything, all the resources that we use are biodegradable, then we would go back to times like, I wouldn't say going back, but we're kind of like going back to Edo period, where
Yeah.
it is a very, it's one of the most prosperous nation in the world at that time, and people have pretty much good living standards. But there wasn't any plastics to fulfill that. People were using a lot of good wood. They were able to build houses. They can go around, sharing
Yeah.
food
So
without the need,
Edo was
yeah,
a city of no waste, right?
of no waste. Yes. I think we can go back to that city of no waste during the Edo period, but then we don't need the some of the banality, evil, and some of the bad things that happened in the past. I'm sure there's also violence during the Edo period, but and we're not supposed to romanticize the past too much either. But I think the introduction of plastic into our modern society, and the in in the name of convenience, we are over producing plastics, overusing it. For example, if we don't have plastics, you might have to walk to the nearest restaurant and eat, maybe in a local setting, instead of ordering for a plastic
Hmm.
food to be delivered to your doorstep. Or
Hmm.
maybe, I mean, they could use, a paper container or something to bring it. But then everyone would have to adapt. And I think humans are very good at adapting. It's just that we need more systemic measures
All right.
to make us adapt. We can, without the plastic, we have to localize, you know, localize as in support the local farms, support the local food system, support the local community. And, we wouldn't think in terms of, plastic sometimes give you the convenience to think of, okay, I'm going to pack this food or pack something and use it like a week later or something, you know. But then you're more primed to live in the present moment, because you know that things cannot last forever. And plastic creates, I mean, plastic, because they last for thousands of years without being decomposed, they create the fake illusion that things can last forever. I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, at least so in Japan, still there are so many plastics.
Yeah.
But at least I want to use plastics not as a one-time container, but yeah, we can use plastic, container recycling.
Yes.
Right.
Reuse, recycle. And also, but we still don't know the effect of microplastics on our body yet. The idea that, if you reuse plastics again and again, some small particles from the plastics might actually go into the water, and you might be consuming it too much. We don't know whether that has an effect on the body, whether it's carcinogenic, whether it can cause cancer. So it's hard to say whether it's good or bad to reuse it, but I'm sure there are different qualities of plastics as well. Some plastics which are stronger and made for to be reused again and again, like water bottles that people sell in the supermarkets. I think those are quite safe at the moment, but it's not good to use the water bottle that you buy, the water plastic bottles if you get in 7-Eleven. And if you use it again and again, I think there's quite a huge amount of microplastics that might go into the water. Yeah. So sort of, we still have to lean towards science and to see, the effects of plastics on us moving down the road, I think.
All right. All right. Thank you so much for sharing the year.
Thank you. I enjoyed having this conversation with you. I hope I'm not talking too much, and
it was good. Yeah.
It was good?
Yeah.
Okay.
So see you are a guest.